My husband's life is moving fast. Our bed was left behind. From the outside, my husband's life looked full. New routines, constant plans, endless energy. He was always busy, always somewhere, always becoming someone new. Inside our home, though, time had stopped. Our bedroom grew quiet. Our bed became a place of distance instead of closeness. I told myself it was a phase, stress, life. Anything but the truth I didn't want to face. The more his world accelerated, the more I realized I was being left behind. Not abruptly, slowly, subtly, in the most painful way. This isn't a story about shouting or confrontation. It's about noticing the silence, understanding what it means, and deciding whether to keep waiting in a room that no longer feels like home. If this story helps you recognize when you're being left behind in your own relationship, please leave a like and subscribe. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being married to someone whose life is expanding rapidly while yours remains static, from watching your partner become increasingly engaged with the world outside your home while becoming progressively more absent from the world inside it. My husband Tyler's transformation happened gradually over the course of 18 months, so slowly at first that I attributed the changes to normal life variations, work stress, new hobbies, natural evolution of a long-term relationship. But by the time I fully recognized what was happening, Tyler had built an entire life that didn't include me in any meaningful way, while I'd been waiting in our increasingly silent home for a connection that was never coming back. My name is Hannah Parker, and I'm 37 years old. I'd been married to Tyler for 11 years when I finally acknowledged what had been obvious for months. My husband's life was moving fast in directions I couldn't follow, while our marriage, and particularly our bedroom, had been left behind, frozen in a past that Tyler had moved on from even if I hadn't. This is the story of how I came to understand that being left behind doesn't require dramatic departure or explicit rejection, just the steady accumulation of distance until you realize you're living alone while still married. Tyler and I met when I was 24 and he was 27, both of us working in tech in San Francisco, drawn together by similar backgrounds and compatible life goals. Our courtship and early marriage were comfortable and affectionate, if not intensely passionate. We enjoyed each other's company, shared interests in hiking and traveling, built a pleasant life in the expensive chaos of the Bay Area. We bought a condo, advanced in our respective careers, maintained an active social life with friends and colleagues, checked all the boxes of successful young professional marriage. Our physical relationship in those early years was regular and satisfying without being particularly adventurous or intense. We'd have sex 2 or 3 times a week, reliable intimacy that felt comfortable and connecting even if it didn't involve the kind of passion romance novels describe. I'd always believed that was normal for long-term relationships, that the intense physical desire of new relationships naturally evolved into something more companionate and sustainable over time. Tyler never complained or suggested he wanted something different, so I assumed we were both content with the physical dimension of our marriage. The changes that would eventually reveal how much distance had grown between us began about 2 years ago, when Tyler turned 36. He'd been feeling restless about his career and his fitness, talking about how he was entering his late 30s, and wanted to make sure he stayed healthy and vital, rather than letting himself decline into middle-aged complacency. He started going to the gym more seriously, hired a personal trainer, began following a strict nutrition plan. He joined a recreational sports league, started rock climbing on weekends, signed up for a marathon training program. All of these activities seemed positive and healthy. A husband taking care of himself, building community through sports and fitness, developing discipline and goals. I supported these changes enthusiastically, was happy to see Tyler energized and motivated, encouraged him to pursue activities that made him feel good about himself. When he started spending more evenings at the gym or at climbing practices, when weekend mornings became dominated by long training runs for the marathon, I adjusted our routines to accommodate his new schedule. I took up my own hobbies to fill the time Tyler was now spending on fitness, reading more, taking online classes in graphic design, meeting friends for dinners that Tyler was too busy training to attend. What I didn't notice initially was that as Tyler's life outside our home expanded, his presence inside our home was diminishing in more than just time spent. When Tyler was home, he was increasingly distracted and distant, scrolling through fitness apps and training programs on his phone, watching YouTube videos about running technique or climbing strategies, engaging more with his phone than with me. Our conversations became more superficial and logistical, coordinating schedules, discussing household tasks, exchanging information rather than actually connecting or sharing emotional experiences. More significantly, but more gradually, our physical intimacy began to fade. Sex that had been 2 or 3 times a week became once a week, then every 10 days, then every 2 weeks. When we did have sex, Tyler seemed distracted and rushed, going through motions but not really present or engaged. He'd finish quickly, then immediately get up to shower or check his phone, no longer staying for the kind of post-sex cuddling and connection that had been part of our routine for years. The quality of our physical relationship degraded even more rapidly than the frequency, transforming from something connecting into something perfunctory that we did out of habit or obligation rather than genuine desire. I tried to talk to Tyler about these changes several times during this period. I'd mentioned that I felt like we weren't spending as much quality time together, that I missed him even though we lived in the same house, that our physical relationship seemed to have changed in ways I didn't understand. Tyler's responses were always reassuring in the moment, but ultimately dismissive of my concerns. He'd say he was just tired from training, that his body was exhausted from the physical demands of his new fitness routine, that once the marathon was over, or once he adjusted to the new schedule, we'd reconnect, and things would return to normal. His explanations were plausible enough that I accepted them, told myself I was being needy or insecure, tried to be patient while Tyler worked through this intense fitness phase. But normal never returned. Tyler completed his first marathon, immediately signed up for another one. The training didn't decrease after achieving his goal. It intensified, with Tyler now pursuing faster times and more challenging races. The rock climbing evolved from recreational activity to serious pursuit, with Tyler taking climbing trips on weekends to various locations, joining a competitive climbing team, talking constantly about routes and techniques and training strategies. His body transformed visibly, losing fat, building obvious muscle definition, looking more fit and athletic at 37 than he'd looked at 27 when we'd met. From the outside, Tyler's transformation looked entirely positive. Friends and family commented on how great he looked, how inspired they were by his dedication and discipline, how impressive his marathon times and climbing achievements were. Tyler's social media showed a life full of adventure and accomplishment. Photos from trail runs and climbing expeditions, race finish line pictures with medals and proud expressions, group shots with his training partners and climbing team looking fit and happy and vibrant. Anyone looking at Tyler's life from the outside would see someone thriving, pursuing passions, living fully. But inside our home, inside our bedroom specifically, time had stopped. The bed that had once been a place of connection and intimacy became just a place where we slept, often not even at the same time since Tyler would stay up late watching climbing videos or get up extremely early for training runs. We'd go weeks without any physical contact beyond perfunctory goodnight kisses. When I tried to initiate sex, Tyler would say he was too tired, or that he had an early training session and needed to sleep, or that his body was too sore from his workout. The rejections were always gentle and apologetic, framed as temporary circumstances rather than fundamental rejection. But they accumulated until I stopped initiating at all, stopped trying to connect physically with a husband who clearly didn't desire that connection anymore. The bedroom grew quiet in more than just physical ways. Tyler stopped sharing his internal world with me, his thoughts, his feelings, his experiences and reactions to things happening in his life. Conversations that used to range over books we were reading, politics, plans for the future, became limited to logistics and surface pleasantries. When Tyler did talk about his life, it was about training metrics and race strategies and climbing routes, technical details of activities I didn't participate in and couldn't meaningfully engage with, monologues rather than dialogues that left me feeling more like an audience than a partner. I found myself spending increasing time alone even when Tyler was physically present in our home. He'd be in the living room watching climbing documentaries while I read in the bedroom. He'd be in the home office researching training programs while I cooked dinner alone. He'd be in bed scrolling through his phone, looking at other people's climbing photos while I lay next to him feeling invisible. The distance between us grew not through dramatic conflicts or explicit rejection, but through this steady accumulation of parallel rather than shared existence, of two people living in the same space, but not actually living together in any meaningful sense. About 6 months ago, something happened that forced me to confront what I'd been avoiding acknowledging for many months. Tyler's climbing team was planning a trip to Yosemite for a week of climbing, an annual tradition they'd been doing for several years. Tyler had gone on this trip the previous year when I'd been understanding and supportive, had stayed home alone for a week while he pursued his passion with his climbing friends. But this year, when he casually mentioned the upcoming trip while we were having breakfast one morning, something broke inside me. "You're going on that trip again?" I asked, hearing my own voice sound flat and defeated. "Another week where you'll be gone climbing while I stay home alone?" Tyler looked confused by my tone, clearly not understanding why this year's trip would be any different from last year's. "It's an annual tradition with the team," he said, as if that explained everything. "You knew about this trip. I told you months ago it was coming up. Why are you upset about it now?" And I realized that Tyler genuinely didn't understand why I might be hurt by him choosing to spend a week pursuing adventure with friends rather than with his wife, why the cumulative weight of months of distance and disconnection might make this particular absence feel unbearable rather than just inconvenient. "When was the last time we spent a week together?" I asked. "When was the last time you planned a trip for us? Something we'd do as a couple. Something that was about our relationship rather than about your climbing or your training." Tyler thought about this question, and I watched him realize he didn't have a good answer. We hadn't taken a vacation together in over 18 months. Every weekend trip Tyler took was for climbing or races, and I'd stopped joining him because I was tired of sitting alone watching him pursue activities I couldn't participate in while having no quality time together. "We can plan something," Tyler said, his tone suggesting this was a simple problem easily solved. "After the Yosemite trip, we can plan a vacation together. Where do you want to go?" But I didn't want a vacation planned as consolation for the week he was spending away from me. I wanted a husband who naturally wanted to spend time with me, who prioritized our relationship without having to be asked or reminded, who recognized that months of distance might require active repair rather than continued absence. The conversation devolved into our first real fight in months, maybe years. Actual raised voices and expressed frustration rather than the careful, pleasant exchanges that had characterized our recent interactions. I told Tyler I felt abandoned and neglected, that our marriage had become just logistics and cohabitation while he built a full, rich life that didn't include me. Tyler said I was being unfair, that he'd worked hard to build health and fitness that made him feel good about himself, that I should be happy for him rather than resentful, that my expectations for constant attention and connection were unrealistic for a long-term marriage. "I'm not asking for constant attention," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm asking for any attention. I'm asking for you to act like you still want to be married to me, like I'm someone you desire and want to be close to rather than someone you're obligated to live with. We haven't had sex in 6 weeks, Tyler. 6 weeks. And before that, it was 3 weeks. And every time I try to talk to you about it, you say you're tired or busy or you'll be better after the next race or the next climbing trip. But it never gets better. It only gets worse, more distant, more like we're roommates than spouses." Tyler was silent for a long moment after this outburst. Then he said something that confirmed what I'd been suspecting but not wanting to face. "Maybe this is just what happens in long-term marriages. Maybe the intense physical connection isn't sustainable, and we evolve into something more companionate. Maybe your expectations for what marriage should look like at 11 years are based on unrealistic romantic ideals, rather than on what actual long-term relationships are like." His words hit me like physical blows. Tyler was essentially telling me that our sexless distance was normal and expected, that my desire for physical and emotional intimacy was unrealistic, that I should accept this new dynamic as the natural evolution of our marriage rather than as a problem that needed addressing. He was framing my hurt and loneliness as my problem, my unrealistic expectations, my inability to adapt, my failure to accept reality, rather than as our problem that we needed to solve together. "Is there someone else?" I asked suddenly, the question emerging from a place of intuition rather than evidence. Is the reason you don't want me anymore because you want someone else? Tyler's face showed genuine shock, and his denial was immediate and emphatic. No, there's no one else, he said firmly. This isn't about another woman. This is about me changing, growing, becoming someone different than who I was when we got married, and maybe you not changing with me, not growing in the same directions, so we're not as compatible now as we used to be. His explanation was meant to be reassuring. No affair, no betrayal, no deception, but it was actually more painful because it positioned our distance as fundamental incompatibility rather than as a problem with external causes that could be addressed. After that fight, Tyler did go on his Yosemite climbing trip. I spent the week he was gone thinking deeply about our marriage, about what I wanted versus what I was getting, about whether Tyler's framing was right and I was holding on to unrealistic expectations, or whether my needs for intimacy and connection were legitimate and unmet in ways that made our marriage unsustainable. I talked to close friends, read articles and books about intimacy and long-term relationships, tried to understand whether what I was experiencing was normal evolution or legitimate neglect. What I concluded was that while physical passion does naturally moderate in long-term relationships, complete withdrawal of physical affection and intimate connection wasn't normal or healthy. That wanting your spouse to actively desire you, to prioritize time together, to maintain emotional and physical closeness wasn't unrealistic. It was basic relationship maintenance. That Tyler's framing of our distance as my problem reflected his unwillingness to take responsibility for how his choices and priorities had pushed me out of his life, while he built new identity and community that didn't include me. I also realized something more painful. Even if Tyler agreed to work on our marriage, even if he acknowledged the distance and committed to reconnecting, I wasn't sure I wanted to anymore. The months of rejection and dismissal, of feeling invisible in my own marriage, of being treated as unreasonable for wanting basic intimacy and connection, all of that had damaged my feelings for Tyler in ways that might not be repairable. I'd spent so much energy trying to get his attention, trying to maintain our connection, trying to be patient while he pursued his new passions, that I'd depleted my own desire to keep fighting for a marriage where I was clearly not a priority. When Tyler returned from Yosemite, energized and happy from his week of climbing with friends, I told him I thought we should see a marriage counselor. I framed it as an ultimatum without using that word. Either we got professional help to address the distance and disconnection in our marriage, or I wanted to separate because I couldn't continue living in this lonely parallel existence we were calling a marriage. Tyler agreed to counseling, though his agreement felt more like checking a box than genuine commitment to change. The marriage counseling sessions revealed dynamics I'd understood intuitively, but hadn't articulated clearly. Our therapist, Dr. Morrison, identified that Tyler had essentially created a new life over the past 18 months, where his identity, social connections, physical energy, and sense of accomplishment all came from his fitness and climbing pursuits. I had become relegated to home base, the person who maintained the logistics of his life, but who wasn't part of the exciting, energizing, identity-defining parts of his existence. Dr. Morrison explained that this pattern was common when one partner pursues intensive hobbies or career changes. They build new communities and identities that feel vibrant and exciting compared to long-term domestic relationships that feel routine and obligatory. The problem, Dr. Morrison explained during one session, is that Tyler is getting all his emotional and social needs met through his climbing and running communities. He comes home depleted, physically tired from training, emotionally satisfied from connections with training partners and climbing friends, mentally engaged by planning routes and strategies. There's nothing left over for Hannah because everything is being given to these other pursuits. And because those pursuits feel positive and healthy, fitness and outdoor recreation, it's easy to justify prioritizing them rather than recognizing they're crowding out the marriage. Dr. Morrison asked Tyler directly, "What do you get from your marriage that you don't get from your climbing and running communities?" Tyler struggled to answer the question. He eventually said things like stability and someone who knows my history and shared financial partnership. All true, but none of them about me as a person he desired or valued beyond functional roles. He couldn't articulate emotional or physical needs that I specifically met, couldn't identify ways that being married to me enhanced his life beyond practical benefits. The inability to answer that question revealed how little he'd been thinking about our marriage as something valuable in itself, rather than as background infrastructure for the life he was building elsewhere. Dr. Morrison also identified that our sexual distance wasn't just about tiredness or physical depletion from training. It was about Tyler having redirected his energy and vitality away from our marriage toward his new pursuits and communities. When someone is genuinely too tired for sex consistently, Dr. Morrison explained, they're usually too tired for other activities too. But Tyler isn't too tired for climbing trips or long training runs or socializing with his climbing team. He's too tired specifically for intimacy with Hannah, which suggests the issue isn't physical exhaustion, but rather emotional and sexual disconnection that physical tiredness is being used to justify. Confronted with this analysis, Tyler acknowledged that he had been avoiding physical intimacy with me, though he struggled to explain why. It feels like pressure, he eventually admitted. Like another obligation I'm supposed to perform, another way I'm supposed to be there for someone when I'm already stretched thin trying to meet all my training goals and work responsibilities and social commitments. Sex used to feel easy and natural, but now it feels like one more thing on a list of things I should be doing to be a good husband, and I don't want to add it to the list. I want things that feel spontaneous and exciting, and sex with Hannah feels like neither of those things anymore. His honesty was devastating. Tyler was essentially saying that physical intimacy with me felt like a chore, an obligation, something he avoided because it didn't give him the excitement and energy he got from his other activities. He wasn't saying he desired other women specifically. He was saying he desired the feeling of novelty and excitement and challenge that his new pursuits provided, and that our long-term familiar intimacy couldn't compete with those feelings. Our marriage, our bed, our connection, all of it felt boring and obligatory compared to the stimulation of pushing physical limits and achieving goals and being part of exciting, adventurous communities. Dr. Morrison worked with Tyler to understand that maintaining long-term relationships requires actively choosing intimacy and connection, even when they feel less exciting than novel experiences, that marriage involves sometimes prioritizing your partner even when other activities seem more appealing in the moment, that the obligation feeling he was describing was actually about his choice to deprioritize our relationship rather than about sex itself being inherently burdensome. But while Tyler intellectually understood these concepts, translating them into changed behavior proved extremely difficult. Tyler did make some efforts to reconnect over the months we were in counseling. He scheduled date nights, made time for conversations without his phone, initiated sex occasionally, rather than always waiting for me to initiate or avoiding it entirely. But the efforts felt performative and forced, like items being checked off a homework assignment from Dr. Morrison rather than genuine desire to be close to me. The sex we had during this period was worse than no sex, mechanical and disconnected. Both of us going through motions because the therapist had suggested more physical intimacy was important. Neither of us actually present or engaged or finding any real pleasure or connection in the act. About 4 months into counseling, Dr. Morrison asked us individually, in separate sessions, whether we actually wanted to save our marriage or whether we were going through the motions because divorce felt too scary or complicated to face. When she asked me this question, I cried for the first time in our sessions, finally admitting what I'd been avoiding. I didn't know if I wanted to save the marriage anymore. The person Tyler had become over the past 18 months wasn't someone I felt connected to or compatible with. The distance between us felt so vast that bridging it seemed impossible. And most painfully, I wasn't sure Tyler actually wanted to bridge it. His efforts felt dutiful rather than genuine, motivated by guilt and social expectations rather than by actual desire to rebuild what we'd had. Dr. Morrison suggested that perhaps Tyler and I needed to have an honest conversation about whether our marriage was actually salvageable or whether we'd grown into incompatible people who needed to separate. This conversation happened in a session where Dr. Morrison facilitated, preventing us from falling into defensive patterns or avoidance that had characterized our attempts to discuss this at home. "Do you still want to be married to me?" I asked Tyler directly. my voice surprisingly steady. Not because you're supposed to, not because divorce seems difficult or embarrassing, but because you actually want me in your life as your partner, your lover, your person. Do you want that, or are you just trying to avoid feeling like you failed? Tyler was quiet for a long time before answering. I don't know, he finally said, his honesty cutting despite being what I'd asked for. I care about you. I respect you. I don't want you to be hurt. But do I feel passionate desire to be with you specifically? Do I miss you when we're not together? Do I think about you during my day and want to share experiences with you? Honestly, no. I think about climbing routes and training schedules and race strategies. I think about my climbing partners and where we're planning to go next. I come home because it's where I live, where my stuff is, where you are. But I don't come home because I'm excited to see you or because home is where I most want to be. His admission was the most honest thing Tyler had said in months, and it was absolutely devastating. He didn't want to be married to me anymore in any meaningful sense beyond practical convenience and avoiding the disruption of divorce. Our bedroom had been left behind not because of temporary stress or fitness fatigue, but because Tyler had emotionally left the marriage, had built a new life where I was irrelevant background rather than central figure, had stopped choosing me in any way that mattered while expecting me to continue maintaining the infrastructure of domestic life that supported his pursuits. I told Tyler I wanted to separate, that even if he decided he wanted to try to save the marriage, I was no longer willing to keep trying. That months of feeling invisible and rejected and undesired had killed my willingness to keep fighting for connection with someone who clearly didn't value that connection, that I deserved a partner who actually wanted me, who prioritized our relationship, who didn't treat intimacy as burdensome obligation. Tyler accepted this decision with what seemed like relief. Sadness about the failure of our marriage, but relief about not having to keep performing reconnection he didn't genuinely feel. The divorce process took about 8 months to finalize. Because we had no children and relatively straightforward finances, the legal aspects were uncomplicated. We divided our assets, sold our condo, went our separate ways with minimal drama or conflict. Tyler moved in with a climbing partner temporarily, eventually got his own apartment closer to his climbing gym and the trails where he trained. I moved to a smaller but quieter neighborhood, started rebuilding a life that was mine rather than orbiting around a partner who'd left me behind emotionally long before he'd left physically. In the years since our separation, I've done significant work in therapy processing, not just the end of my marriage, but my role in letting things deteriorate for so long without facing reality. Dr. Morrison helped me understand that I'd been making excuses for Tyler's behavior, attributing distance and disconnection to temporary circumstances like training fatigue, rather than recognizing they were symptoms of fundamental changes in how Tyler felt about me and our marriage. I'd accepted his framing that my needs for intimacy were unrealistic, rather than trusting my own assessment that being treated as optional in your own marriage is legitimately painful regardless of what stage of relationship you're in. I've also processed the particular pain of being left behind rather than being explicitly rejected. If Tyler had cheated or explicitly said he didn't love me anymore, the ending would have been clearer, the betrayal more obvious. But being slowly edged out of someone's life while they build new identity and communities that don't include you, that kind of rejection is harder to name and harder to defend against. You keep thinking maybe things will improve. Maybe after the next race or the next climbing trip they'll have more time. Maybe you're being unreasonable to expect more attention when they're pursuing such positive, healthy activities. The gradual nature of being left behind makes it easy to not notice until you're completely isolated in your own relationship. Tyler, from what I hear through mutual friends, is thriving in his post-divorce life. He's climbing harder routes, running faster marathons, traveling to exciting locations for adventures, living exactly the vibrant athletic life he'd been building during our marriage, without the burden of a wife who expected time and attention he didn't want to give. His social media shows a life full of adventure and accomplishment, and attractive, fit people having experiences I couldn't have provided or participated in. From the outside, divorcing me probably looks like it freed Tyler to become fully himself. And maybe that's true. Maybe Tyler and I had grown incompatible in ways that divorce was the right solution for. Maybe the person he wanted to become required leaving behind not just our marriage but the kind of intimate partnered life that marriage represents. Maybe his accelerating life and our frozen bedroom were incompatible from the beginning, and I just hadn't wanted to face it. What I know now is that I deserve someone whose life includes me, rather than someone who treats me as home base for a life lived elsewhere. I deserve physical intimacy that feels desired rather than obligatory. I deserve a partner who thinks about me during their day, who wants to share experiences with me, who comes home because they're excited to see me rather than just because it's where their stuff is. Tyler couldn't provide those things, not because he was a terrible person, but because he'd become someone different who wanted a different life that didn't include the kind of marriage I needed. The bedroom that had been left behind, that had grown so quiet and distant during Tyler's transformation into an athletic adventurer, eventually became symbol of everything that was wrong in our marriage. The physical manifestation of emotional and sexual disconnection, the place where distance was most obvious and painful. Living in that silence while Tyler's life accelerated around me had been slowly devastating, eroding my sense of self and my trust that I deserved to be wanted and chosen. My name is Hannah Parker. I'm 37 years old and divorced from a man whose life moved fast in directions I couldn't follow while our bedroom was left behind, frozen in a past he'd moved on from. I spent months telling myself it was temporary, making excuses for distance and rejection, accepting his framing that my needs were unrealistic rather than trusting my own experience, that being left behind in your own marriage is legitimately painful. The ending came not from dramatic betrayal, but from slow recognition that the person I'd married no longer existed, replaced by someone who'd built a full, vibrant life that didn't include me in any meaningful way. And while his life looked successful and adventurous and impressive from the outside, I learned that I'd rather be alone than be lonely in a marriage, rather be single than be left behind by someone who's supposed to be my partner. Thank you for reading. If this story helped you recognize the difference between being loved and being tolerated, please like and subscribe.